everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. We're going to cover everything. We're going to cut through all the propaganda, give it to you straight from left, right, and center. The opinions are what counts. Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and hope everybody's off to a great start this weekend. Folks, we are really privileged today. I mean, the wealth of information you're going to get on the show is second to none because we have a guest on our show today. He's authored over 25 books, worked for the CIA before, taught at very prestigious universities. Dr. Mark Skousen, welcome to Schaftlein Report. Happy to have you with me today.
It's a real pleasure to be part of Patriot TV. That sounds like the right kind of message we want to send these days.
I love the plug. All right, Dr. Mark, look, I gave you a little heads up coming into the show. For the benefit of our viewers and listeners, you are one of the top economists in the country. You have a wealth of information, great academic background, wrote 25 books. Give our audience a little bit of your background, where you've been, what you've done, and then you and I will dive into the issues that made headlines during the past week.
Well, I've made the rounds, so to speak. I've lived in 6 different countries and visited almost 80 countries, I think, altogether in my career. I started off growing up on the West Coast in California, born in California, grew up in Portland, Oregon, and then gradually shifted to the East, ended up working for the CIA after going to college and got a PhD in economics and monetary economics, and I've been basically involved in all aspects of society. I've worked for the government with the CIA. I was the president of a nonprofit organization called FEE for a couple of years, and then I have been an investment newsletter writer, writing forecasts and strategies, lived in Washington, D.C., lived in the Bahamas for 2 years, moved to London, spent some time there, and have lived in Orlando, New York, and now California. And during that entire time, I've been writing on economic and financial topics, which is my area of expertise. Been married for 51 years to the same wife, to Joanne Skousen. We've had a wonderful marriage, 5 children, 8 grandchildren. And I run a nonprofit, not a nonprofit, but for-profit conference called Freedom Fest every year. And we're coming up July 10th through the 13th in Las Vegas. We've been doing that for over 15 years. So lots of activities, lots of efforts to promote liberty and economic freedom, and writing books, trying to influence students. I teach now at Chapman University out here in California, taught at Columbia Business School, Rollins College. So I've made the rounds academically. I have one foot in the academic world, one foot in the real world. So that's kind of a summary, I guess, of my life.
Well, Dr. Mark, let's just to put our audience at ease, and I'll make a statement, you can confirm it. Folks, he is not part of the deep state, even though he has a very colorful and high background. Dr. Mark, I'll let you confirm that, and then we'll dive into the topics of the day.
Well, I have a background in both conservative and libertarian politics, and so no, I wouldn't be part of the deep state, although I'd like to know more. But what those people are doing.
I know, I hear it all the time. So, all right, Dr. Mark, let's get into it here. And I guess the central question of the day, and it's sort of a perplexing one, so maybe you can shed some light on it. We got some really good economic news on Friday. 272,000 jobs created. Yes, the unemployment rate ticked from 3.9 to 4%. But as you're well aware, Dr. Mark, that is very low by historical standards. We got a GDP, the economy's growing 2.8 to 3%. Mark, these are good economic numbers. And yet, for some reason, a great deal of the country is questioning the growth in our economy. They're questioning what's happening to them. A lot of people feel like they're getting behind. And it's sort of an issue that's fallen in Donald Trump's lap. How in the world, with this type of good economic news, are so many people feeling so much angst in the country?
Well, I think we're really entering a period of stagflation, which by that we mean stubborn inflation, as well as an economy that's really not growing that much. Yes, the jobs looked good today, but you need 265,000 new jobs every month just to keep up with the population growth. So this latest statistic is simply keeping up with population growth. And who knows how many people are coming in as far as immigrants are concerned. So there's that issue as well. You also have to remember that there's a struggle with the job market. Even though the unemployment rate is 4%, that includes only people who are looking for a job. It does not include those who have given up looking for jobs or who have dropped out of the labor force. And the employment participation rate is near all-time lows in this country. Also, graduates, there was a big article in the New York Times by Peter Coy talking about how graduates are having a hard time finding jobs. So I think there's a lot of angst there due to the rising inflation, the difficulty in keeping up. People are living paycheck to paycheck. There's a lot of factors that give people concern. And also, people are looking forward too. And the economic indicators, leading indicators, have been negative now for over a year. They've been on a gradual decline. And so the GDP statistic, real GDP, only grew at 1.3% in the first quarter. So there's definitely a sense that we're headed for a stagflation type of economy is the best way I would describe it. Things aren't terrible, but they aren't necessarily very good either, and they could get worse.
The stagflation, boy, that reminds me of an era past. And from what I remember about it, Dr. Mark, that was not a fun time. I mean, in the scenario you're describing, probably 75% of the population goes backwards and not forward, because the one thing I've sensed among the American public, inflation is a crushing blow to average Americans. I mean, they may have had wages go up, but the inflation is far outstripping the wage gains. And that's leading to a confidence problem, I believe. Does that make sense, Dr. Mark? I mean, is that part of the core fundamental issues where once confidence starts to wane, people tighten their belts, and then with inflation exceeding wage gains, people are actually poorer rather than wealthier?
Well, I think it's not a dire situation. People do have jobs if they want them. It's not like we're actually in recession, but we are certainly seem to be headed in that direction. And one of the problems is also that we have an excessive growth in government regulation, taxation, interference in the labor markets. I mean, out here in California, as you know, the minimum wage has been raised to $20 an hour for fast food restaurants, and people are being laid off. And they're trying to raise prices in order to counter these regulations. That is not good. So one thing that I did like about the Trump era is that he tended to deregulate the economy. And also, you have to remember one of the benefits that's going on, and one of the reasons the stock market is near all-time highs, is because the Trump tax cuts, particularly the corporate tax rate that has been reduced from 35% to 21%, is working its miracles through the economy. So Biden can take full credit for what's going on, but a lot of it is due to the Trump tax cut, the corporate tax cut that is still in place, and that's a permanent change that hasn't been changed at all. And so hiring and so forth is there are some elements in technology that's growing, lots of interest in that. So, and by the way, I should mention that in real terms, the stock market is really basically about the same what it was before this inflation really took off. So inflation has really taken a bite out of the return on investments in the stock market. So even though it's at an all-time high, in real terms, it really hasn't changed that much in 3 years.
Dr. Mark, let me ask you this, because you mentioned that Biden has really benefited from the Trump tax policies. And I find two interesting things about that because he was constantly out on the trail talking about Bidenomics. And finally, some of the geniuses in the White House who are 20 and 30-year-old staffers said, Mr. President, you better retire that term because people in our demographic are not feeling the enthusiasm and the gains that you continue to preach about Bidenomics. And then Dr. Mark, he goes out and he explains in a speech that he not only is he's going to not extend those Trump tax cuts, but the Biden administration, if they were reelected, is looking to impose more crushing taxes on higher income earners. I mean, that to me seems like it's bass ass backwards and is just going to add fuel to the fire on growing deficits and possibly higher unemployment.
Well, Mark, I think you have to remember that business is the key factor. You need to have a really strong business environment that promotes entrepreneurship, and we still have that. The American dream has not died, but it's become harder to achieve because of all these regulations, especially in the EV area, electronic vehicles, and pushing the global warming agenda. And I think that is creating some problems as well. But we need to realize that we live in an era of permanent inflation. You're never going to get rid of inflation the way we since we've left the gold standard since 1971. And in fact, we've had permanent inflation since World War II. I show a graph to my students, which is really revealing, showing that inflation was not really a problem except during wartime in the United States for 150 years. And then after World War II, inflation has become permanent, continuously rising prices. Why is that? Well, it's a whole combination of the Federal Reserve, creation of the Federal Reserve, which has been an engine of inflation, going off the gold standard, adopting Keynesian economics, adopting the dollar instead of gold as the backing of our currency. So there are a lot of factors that have pushed us to permanent inflation. So now it's just a question of we have rising inflation or falling inflation, but we're still facing inflation. The only time we're seeing a reduction in prices is in the private sector. You'll notice that inflation is worse in schooling, education, in medical care, and that's because government has played a major role in those sectors. But in the private sector, prices have been relatively, private sector has done everything they can to reduce the cost of living, but they're fighting up against big government and a welfare state that's out of control. Number of people on welfare continues to constantly increase. There's just a lot of problems that could be fixed. I'm an optimist because we do have solutions to these problems. It's just that the current government's not listening.
Well, speaking of that, and it's perplexing to me because what you said about inflation, I think, is spot on. I mean, the average person out there, again, their paychecks have gone up, but they're every time they go to the grocery store, if they go to see the doctor, okay, if they want to, their rents are going up. Now that's somewhat stabilized across the country. Interest rates are still relatively high for people that want to buy a house. I know I just came back from Florida. It's $300 a square foot to build houses down in Florida right now because they have 800 people a day moving into a red state that has a lot of the things that's opposite from what the federal government's doing. So with deficits, Dr. Mark, continuing at unprecedented levels, I mean, we're running $2 trillion deficits. And, frankly, I don't see any appetite from the Republicans or the Democrats who are looking to reduce that deficit because one thing about the politicians, I mean, they just never quit spending. I want you to ponder that for just a second, folks. $2 trillion deficits. We've had them now for what, Dr. Mark, 4 straight years. And folks, we're going to do this. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I really want to dive into this deficit piece because $2 trillion deficits, $35 trillion in debt, and there's no end in sight. Be back in 60, folks.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold.
Call Kirk Elliott, PhD at 877-547-5743. That's 877-KIRK-PhD.
Sounds rolling, all 3 cameras, we're good.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General Michael Flynn pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Really brilliant military career, serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn, one of America's most treasured military heroes. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Go to Patriot TV, click on Store, and grab a once-in-a-lifetime chance to own a treasured piece of American history. And get your own personal download link to watch America's most talked-about movie, as well as a DVD hand-signed by General Michael Flynn. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store. Incredible savings and a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
And we're back, folks. Gold's over $2,200 an ounce, pushing $2,300. Silver's over $32. Contact Dr. Kirk Elliott. He will help you out. And go to that Patriot TV store. General Michael Flynn, a great American hero. All right, Dr. Mark, before the break, we were talking about these $2 trillion deficits that have been happening almost on a regular basis right now. And our national debt is sitting here at $35 trillion. Share with our audience the risk of that. I mean, I don't see anything that's going to contemplate reducing it here in the short term, given the current makeup of Congress.
Well, Mark, I think you need to look at 2 different factors here involved. First of all, there's not the will to reduce government spending at this point. There's a number of reasons for that. But basically, when you have adopted a policy of you don't need to balance the budget in any particular year, you can raise the debt ceiling, which, by the way, the debt ceiling is a balanced budget that's already in place. And but we just don't have the will. We keep raising the debt ceiling and continuing to spend money like water. There's 2 reasons for this. One is that both sides of the political spectrum, both the Republicans and Democrats, do not have this will. Even under Trump, deficits continued and actually grew. So there really is no effort there. And supply side economists like Steve Moore and Art Laffer and so forth, they actually argue that it doesn't really matter what the deficit is. What really matters is government spending. So they've let the horse out of the barn, or let the door open, and as a result, you get that. And Keynesian economics was the key factor after World War II. It was adopted by the United States and basically argued that we don't need to run a deficit. In fact, we should run a deficit during downturns. But then, of course, when we have the good years, which we should have right now, we're at full employment, as you pointed out, we should be running a surplus. And so even Keynesian economists have given up. They're not listening to the classical economists or even the Keynesian economics in that respect. But the other factor is the interest rate, Mark. The interest rate, until the interest rate spikes up, nobody really cares. But now the interest rate is causing the interest on the national debt to be the biggest cost of running government. It's now more than defense spending. So I think we are headed for a crisis there, and we will have to address the deficit problem. Other countries have done it. there's no reason why the U.S. can't adopt it as well. So I'm hopeful that at some point we will be willing to address that problem. But until interest rates spike up again, even at a higher rate, there seems to be no real will to return to cover this.
Well, Dr. Mark, I mean, even on Friday after the unemployment numbers and the job report came out, I mean, we still have interest rates sub 5% on 2-year notes all the way up to 30-year notes. 2-year notes are pushing closer to it. You have a slightly inverted yield curve right now. But with this type of employment being created, Wall Street was banking earlier this year on 4 or 5 rate cuts. And I mean, economists that have come on this show, myself, my opinion included, we've said all year long we thought 0 or 1 rate cut. But how in the world can you be cutting interest rates when you're having this type of economic expansion? Wouldn't that just literally add fuel to the fire on further speculation in a market that, you know, it is arguably somewhat aggressively priced right now based on 7 technology stocks? Dr. Mark, how do you see it? I mean, if you were in Jerome Powell's shoes right now, seeing the economic growth where it is, seeing these deficits, and seeing, as you pointed out, interest, again, this is not a surprise, taking up a bigger chunk of our federal deficit, what would you do if you were the Federal Reserve Chairman right now?
Well, I would do 2 factors. One is, of course, that interest rates are not going to be cut, by the way. If the economy continues, it's only if you have a severe recession is that when they're going to cut rates. But they are controlling the money supply much better. The money supply went up 40% from 2021 to 2022. And since then, they have been more responsible, the Federal Reserve has, in not allowing the money supply to grow. But as you know, Jay Powell doesn't look at the money supply anymore. He's not a monetarist like Milton Friedman, and that's a big mistake. So at least he's doing the right thing in that regard. But the fiscal policy is the problem, and they need to get control and start reducing sharply government spending. So what I would do is make it clear in Congress. Mike Johnson and the others need to make it clear in Congress that next time the debt ceiling arises, we're simply not going to approve it. So you need to start now to across the board government cuts and get rid of the waste. I mean, just the waste in defense spending and in welfare, the welfare system. We had the Welfare Reform Act that Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich engineered back in 1996, 97. And we actually saw an actual reduction in the use of food stamps and Medicaid and stuff like that. So we need to do that. And we need to back off of economic regulations that are stifling economic growth, which is anemic right now at 1.3%. And B2B spending is in a recession. The supply chain is in a recession. There's a trucking recession. The amount of the volume of traffic is in a decline, and that indicates a possibility of a recession. So there's a lot of factors, a lot of things that could be done and they need to back off this minimum wage increases and things like that.
So you mentioned earlier about what's happening in California, fast food workers. I mean, they're already being replaced by machines. You can't get the service you used to get. And again, this is one of those things, what starts in California gravitates to the rest of the country. I'm not so certain that's going to happen because this experiment has been a colossal failure. On top of that, we could get into all kinds of socioeconomic problems associated with it. But along the lines of what you're talking about, as much as I agree 100% with what you just said, and it makes perfect sense, you know, right now we've got a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and by a whisker, a Republican House of Representatives. And obviously, when we have the election coming up this fall, polling indicates, I'm not going to talk about the presidential piece, but polling indicates right now that you may have a shift and you could have a Republican Senate based upon just the sheer number of seats that the Democrats have to defend that Republicans don't. On the House, as you're well aware, it's a razor-thin margin, slight edge to Republicans. But Dr. Mark, Donald Trump is up, let's call it 15, 25 points on economic issues related to voters. Voters trust Trump, let's call it an average of 20 points over President Biden. If President Trump is reelected, most elections are based on economics and people's feelings, their pocketbook issues. Can a Republican president with a Republican Senate and a Republican House do some of the things that you're advocating, or at least better than what they call it, profligate spending, which we've been experiencing?
Yes, I'm very hopeful that we can see change. I think the Trump policies in general were quite positive in terms of deregulation and tax cut. I'm not a fan of the American First doctrine of protectionism. And Trump has actually doubled down on that and saying he's going to have a 10% across the board protectionist tariffs. And I think that is a major mistake. Globalization is here to stay and we need to work with it. And these companies that are benefiting from free trade are investing back in the United States and creating a lot of jobs. You'll notice lots of car companies are coming into the United States from Europe and Asia and building here in the United States. So there's dynamic changes that are happening that we should not resist in that respect. We do have to deal with China and foreign policy and that sort of thing. Hopefully under Trump, there will be fewer wars. That would be helpful. We need to see, particularly, we want to get back to federal judges being appointed that are rational and not woke. And that's one thing that could be very helpful. Trump's actually selected some very good Supreme Court justices and federal judges, and that's all being reversed by the Democrats being in power. So I'd like to see the Republicans regain the Senate, in particularly for that. And then whether they pass really good legislation or not, well, they had 4 years to get rid of a lot of the problems. We keep hearing we're going to get rid of the Department of Education, which is a total waste of expenditures. That money should be given back to the people and to the states rather than federal regulation. So we haven't drained the swamp really, particularly under 4 years of Trump, and I'm not sure anything can be done in that respect. We can certainly grow out of our troubles with tax cuts and so forth, but you got to have control on government spending. There's no question about that. So that would be something I would like to see, a Republican-controlled House and Senate. But as you say, Trump may win the presidency, but we're going to have gridlock on Capitol Hill the way things are looking, unless they pull out a miracle and have control of both houses. So we'll see what happens.
Well, I'm optimistic, and I'll tell you why, Dr. Mark. Particularly in the Senate, you've got right now 48 solid Republican seats. And when I look at some of the races, there's likely pickups. West Virginia, that's almost a given. The seats Republicans have to hold, I think they're going to hold. We have an opportunity for a pickup in Montana. Ohio, I could go through the list, but I think there's a very good chance that Republicans will control the Senate. The House is more. I don't have a sense that could go either way right now. And Dr. Mark, as you're well aware, the spending starts in the House of Representatives. So I share your optimism on that, and I'd like to think. Look, right now, a lot of the young people in this country who are a key voting bloc that voted for Joe Biden in the last election, particularly African-American men whose unemployment rate recently ticked up into the 6% range, they're not so happy. They don't see some of this economic progress that you and I have talked about today. And if those voting patterns continue, I think that there's going to be a situation where Republicans could sweep across it. Because when you look at that polling, we'll talk about this a little bit later, Donald Trump is still leading by the same amount that he was before the trial and the conviction took place. We're going to take a quick break, but Dr. Mark, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about savings rate. So many people in this country have no money saved up, how young people can get ahead with real estate prices where they are, And then I also want to talk about this war on energy that the Biden campaign just never stops. So we'll get into that and some other hot political issues when we come back. See you in 1 minute.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold.
Call Kirk Elliott, PhD at 877-547-5743. That's 877-KIRK-PhD.
Sounds rolling. All 3 cameras. We're good.
Handing speed.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General Michael Flynn pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Brilliant military career, serving 33 years. Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn, one of America's most treasured military heroes. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Go to Patriot TV, click on Store, and grab a once-in-a-lifetime chance to own a treasured piece of American history. And get your own personal download link to watch America's most talked-about movie, as well as a DVD hand-signed by General Michael Flynn. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store. Incredible savings and a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
And folks, we're back with Dr. Mark Skousen. Dr. Mark, we talked about a lot of economic issues so far: government spending, government waste, interest rates, inflation, stock market. But let's drill down to what average Americans are feeling out there. We talked about how wages went up, but inflation's running hotter. One of the problems I see out there is that 60%, that may be on the low and it could be as high as 2/3, of American workers are living paycheck to paycheck. And Dr. Mark, I saw a staggering statistic that close to 2/3 of Americans literally do not have $1,000 saved for emergencies. How can this country, which is the land of opportunity, and we've demonstrated that for a long time with solid economic growth leading the world, how can we bring those folks who are in that category living paycheck to paycheck and have less than $1,000 in savings to bring them up the economic ladder?
Every year, one way or another, at Chapman University and elsewhere. And the first thing I say is that every person who's listening right now wastes at least 10% of their income. They're spending money, they're overspending, they're paying too much, they're not shopping around, they're spending money on wasteful expenditures, 10%. So the way to do that is to have an automatic investment plan where money is taken out of your paycheck automatically without you even seeing it and put away in some good investments. There's some great income investments that I recommend in my newsletter, Forecasts and Strategies. So there's lots of places where you can put that money, and that will automatically put pressure on you to reduce your expenditures. I'll just give you one example. I go into Albertsons or one of the other Safeway or major stores, and you buy these greeting cards. Well, greetings cards cost $5 or $6. Well, if you go to the dollar store just across the street, they're $1 each, sometimes 50 cents each for graduation cards. I go to the dollar store every time and I save a lot of money. And I know that's a really small example, but it demonstrates what is available if people are a little bit more careful. They shop around, they take advantage of deductibles on their insurance to keep the costs of those kinds of things down. They buy a used car instead of a new car. The used cars are just as good as the new cars these days. So there are really a lot of things that can be done in that regard. The other thing that's really important is that people just be more careful in how they spend money, and when you shop around and on flights, on cruises, all of the different things. There's just so many ways to reduce your expenditures. So you can't just count on increasing your income as the only solution. You need to look at a way to cut costs as well.
I agree with you wholeheartedly there, and I see it all the time traveling around the country. I mean, people that they're going into these restaurants, try to go out and have a nice dinner. Now you're not going to $100 per person if you're going to a little bit of a nicer restaurant, and go. A lot of people are complaining about $20 hamburgers in the Northeast. At McDonald's. I mean, it is insane, some of these costs out there. And why is that? Because they're trying to pass along to the consumer when all these employment initiatives come out.
Yeah, but remember one thing that's really important, Mark, and that is we have an obesity crisis in this country. So people are overeating. Maybe they should cut back on some of the eating they have, or eat better. I'm a big fan of John Mackey and Whole Foods diet. And of course, he says, Whole Foods is expensive, certainly, but there are ways to cut back and live a healthier life. That's for sure.
Well,
and I should also mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was also going to mention that one of the things that we do at our Freedom Fest conference every year, which is coming up, is we have a financial seminar, a 3-day financial seminar, where we talk specifically on how you can save money and invest better and be better off, which is a really important thing for people to do.
And Dr. Mark, that's going to be in Las Vegas. Can you give our viewers and listeners the dates and where they would need to go if they wanted to participate in that?
Yeah, we're very excited. We're going to have several thousand people at our Freedom Fest conference that will be in Las Vegas. We're at the Caesars Forum Convention Center, which is a new convention center across the street from Caesar's Palace. And it's a Renaissance gathering. It is philosophy and history and science and technology. And we have healthy living sessions, and we have politics and economics and finance. We have an investment conference. We have the Anthem Film Festival, and we have some big name speakers. We have the Ice-T coming. We have Rob Schneider, the actor's coming. We have Steven Pinker from Harvard, who's written a book on enlightenment. We have Steve Moore, which I'm sure many people know, and John Fund, and people like that are coming. And we have hopefully President Milei from Argentina, who's making some real noise in South America and what's happening there. So there's a lot going on. People go to freedomfest.com. They can find all the information about it. And it's really going to be a fun conference. So I hope to see a lot of people there.
You mentioned the president of Argentina, newly elected. I mean, that is a success story. Can you elaborate for our audience a little bit about what he's done in Argentina, which was a basket case over the last couple decades? And he really, in a relatively short period of time, has turned it around.
Yeah, I don't know if he's completely turned it around. The jury is still out on whether he can be successful or not. But really, 100 years ago, Argentina used to be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And because they adopted free market capitalism, but then under Juan Perón, the general, and the Peronistas and the unions, they pretty much caused inflation, stagflation, if you will, in Argentina. And it's been kind of a basket case in there. They need to adopt the Chilean model. They seem to be doing so. Javier Milei has come in and won democratically. He's the first libertarian to win democratically without a military coup to take over and try to solve some of these problems. So he has balanced the budget recently, and he's done some good things to bring back the economy and some privatization and so forth. A lot of people feel that he's made a mistake not dollarizing, which would be a great way to end inflation by adopting the dollar. Relatively speaking, you would have much less inflation in Argentina if you adopted the dollar. And he just needs to be careful he doesn't raise taxes and so forth. So we'll see if he's successful or not. But he's facing a lot of opposition. He still has support of the people, but if he goes into a deep recession in Argentina, then that could be problematic, and he may end up losing. So there's really some high stakes going on. So we're looking forward to hearing him and getting an update on what's happening in the world at Freedom Fest.
That will be a great speaker to listen to. I'm a big fan of what he's accomplished so far, and I'm in your camp. I hope he can continue, because he certainly has put the country at least in a position of significant improvement. I want to come back to the U.S. for a minute, Dr. Mark. The Biden administration seems to literally, whatever the policy Trump administration had, they've changed it. I mean, it's almost like every single thing that worked, they're opposed to. This war on oil is just astounding to me. I mean, this country runs on oil, and yet every step of the way, from Keystone to Anwar to effectively trying to put coal companies out of business when China continues to build coal-fired plants. I mean, this war on energy in this country is astounding to me, and yet the country continues to improvise. It continues to grow. Dr. Mark, this war on energy under Trump, it was positive. Under Biden, this has got to be a detriment to our economy. What are your thoughts on what the Biden administration is doing to try to just curtail our energy companies?
Yeah, and they're kind of doing things in the future. In other words, they're imposing all these regulations that say you have to have all EV automobiles by 2035. So they realize that they can't do it right now because it has created shortages and problems when there have been severe weather conditions, especially during the winter. You obviously need traditional oil and gas, the fossil fuels. And what's really amazing to me is that, pollution is really not much of a problem in the U.S. It is a problem in China and places like that. But in the U.S., I do this with my students every year. I say, since 1960, students, has air pollution gotten better or worse? And you won't believe the propaganda they've been fed, because 60% or more think it's gotten worse. And then I show them a chart showing gasoline use in LA County going up and up and up. Meanwhile, pollution going down, 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 down. And they can't believe it, that they've been sold a bill of goods. And this is one of the problems. The public is going along with this idea that somehow we're facing this severe global warming crisis and pollution problem and environment. I mean, we've never had cleaner water and cleaner air. What is a problem is our infrastructure. And I'll tell you, you saw this the other day when they're cutting down all these Joshua trees in California to make room for solar panels. I mean, environmentalists should be outraged at the ugliness of destroying trees in favor of all these ugly solar panels and air, all of this stuff. The windmills, you go into Palm Springs and they've destroyed the beauty of that city. Although it's Palm Springs itself is still a great city, but getting there, it's really kind of ugly now.
Oh, it is. I've made the drive. You come out there and there's just literally these thousands and thousands of these turbines, and they're spinning, and I don't know. I mean, look, I'm not going to criticize alternative methods of finding energy, but boy, you just can't take an economy that is successful as this one and try to put the clamps on it when our number one competitor, China, is embracing the opportunity. And look, the Chinese, whether you like it or not, look, they buy a lot of oil from people that we're not really fanciful with, Iran and other Middle Eastern players. Dr. Mark, China, they don't do the things we're doing. They don't have this big environmental man crush on making sure, the false indoctrination that our kids are dealing with.
One thing that they are doing in the U.S. is finally opening up again to nuclear power. Nuclear power is a great solution to all of these problems because you don't really have a pollution problem per se. I mean, I think they've solved that in that respect, but you don't have the CO2 problem and everything else that they're talking about. So China and India are working pell-mell to produce more nuclear power plants, and the U.S. has finally opened one of them, but they obviously need to do more. So if the Biden administration wants to do anything, they should be promoting nuclear power, which is a great source. And I've been a big bull on uranium in my newsletter, Forecasts and Strategies, and we've done really well with uranium stocks. That's really the future. So oil and gas is still, I think, a great short-term solution, but it just needs to be. We need to look for the best alternative energy source, and that is nuclear power.
Well, Dr. Mark, I want to thank you for taking time to join us today. And folks, I told you the man's got 50 years of economic experience, PhD, wrote 25 books, and a conservative libertarian. Dr. Mark, I cannot thank you enough for coming on my show today. Appreciate you taking the time. And since you're here in Orange County, the next time we get together, I'd like to invite you to come into the studio here and we can have a one-on-one, both of us in front of the camera. Folks, it's Dr. Mark. Again, share information, Dr. Mark, about where they can reach you, your webpage, etc.
Yeah, my webpage is markskousen.com. So that's SKOUSEN. I see, hopefully put my name up there on the screen, but markskousen.com is my website. And for people who are interested in all my books that you mentioned, if they go to skousenbooks.com, they can buy all of my books at a discount. So that's not bad. And then, of course, there's our Freedom Fest conference. If they go to freedomfest.com, they can find out more about that. But thanks a lot, and great to be on your show for the first time. It's been excellent.
Well, for Patriot.tv, we're leading the way, and with Dr. Mark, we can't go wrong. Thank you again for joining us, Dr. Mark. Folks, we'll be back in about a minute and a half with the closing comments.
Sounds rolling. All 3 cameras. We're good.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General Michael Flynn pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Brilliant military career, serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn, one of America's most treasured military heroes. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Go to Patriot TV, click on Store, and grab a once-in-a-lifetime chance to own a treasured piece of American history. And get your own personal download link to watch America's most talked-about movie, as well as a DVD hand-signed by General Michael Flynn. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store. Incredible savings and a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying Patriot.tv. I'm Kira, and I am so excited to tell you about our new store. We have everything you could want to show your patriotism around your house. We've got artwork, we've got coffee mugs, there's health and beauty stuff, and even things to decorate with. I've got a few examples here just to give you a little look behind the scenes. First up, by the world-renowned artist Robert Holton. This is part of his Drizzle collection. Give you a better look at that. How cool is that Lady Liberty? Wouldn't that look great in your hallway? And there's even artwork you can wear on your body. God, Country, and Kin, amazing denim jacket for the ladies. Look at this detail and look at the back. Dangerous there with the twin pistols, and ladies, those are not just bullets, those are lipsticks. Yeah, you're dangerous all the way around, right? And there's also stuff you can put on your head all about the Cowboy Corps this year, right? Love these great hats they've got going. Check out the front and the detail on that with the Longhorn. Lovely in the back, and it looks even better on. Yeehaw! Love to show my patriotism in a great cowboy hat. Check us out at the Patriot.tv store today. Join me there. So if you've got an itch to do a little shopping and show your patriotic spirit, click that link above that says store and join me there at the Patriot TV store.
And we're back. All right, let's get into some of the politics of the day, and let's talk about some recent polling that came out. I want to give you a little bit of insight about where things are in this race right now. You saw polls from Emerson, Morning Consult, Fox News, and I could name a handful of others that have come out. Now we've had a little bit of time since the Trump, quote, guilty verdict. And you know what, folks? We predicted this on the show before it happened, and these predictions have come true again. Just like we said, the Federal Reserve would not be cutting rates. The poll numbers for Donald Trump have not weakened one iota. Yeah, you've had a handful of slight dips, but right now, let's talk about these 7 swing states. And it's really could be 2 more put into play here, and I'll tell you why. Okay, the one solidly in Trump's camp, Arizona, he's up by about 5 points. Nevada, he's up anywhere from 5 to 8 points. Now, I think that 8 might be a little high, but you know, when you're plus 5, 6, 7 points, you're outside the margin of error. Georgia, a state that was razor thin last time, Trump's up 5 to 6 points in Georgia. North Carolina, same situation, up 5 to 6 points. Now, let's talk about the 3 blue wall states. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Folks, Joe Biden has to win all 3 of those states to win re-election. Right now, on the Real Clear Politics average, Trump's up between 2, 2.5, 3 points in Pennsylvania. There have been some polling showing him a little bit higher than that. Pennsylvania's a mixed bag. You know, it generally is a Republican graveyard on the national level. We put a lot of resources into it election after election, and we come up just short. There are some trends, though, that suggest that Pennsylvania is becoming more red. There's more Republicans registering in Pennsylvania. The deficit, meaning more Democrats registered than Republicans, is shrinking. I think there's a real chance that Donald Trump could win Pennsylvania, especially with all the economic issues we talked about, the purchasing power. Pennsylvania's an energy state, folks, and the Biden administration is about as anti-energy as you can get. Michigan, Wisconsin, very, very tight in those 2 states. Trump's up less than a point in both of them. I've seen some polling showing that Trump is actually behind a little bit in Wisconsin. But when you're talking about a 1-point difference here, folks, you cannot read a whole lot into that because you're well within the margin of error. Now, let me give you a couple things. If you're Trump supporters, and I know everybody that watches this show is, there's some polling out there that suggests Virginia, Trump is within a point or 2. There is some polling out there that suggests Minnesota, he may be within 3 to 4 points. Folks, these are states that he got beat pretty resounding in the 2020 election. New Hampshire, another one. Trump only down 2 points, 3 points in New Hampshire. So here's my overriding theme here. If it's really closer, if those numbers are accurate in Virginia, Minnesota, and other states where, you take states, he lost a lot in Virginia. He lost in Minnesota, New Hampshire. He was beaten in those states. What that tells me is that the marginal states, now the key blue wall states, those margins could be greater for Trump than we're anticipating. And of course, you hear people on the left, that are criticizing the Biden administration over their tone deafness in this campaign. James Carville, who orchestrated Bill Clinton's, White House strategy. Carville is singing the alarm everywhere he can about what the Biden administration's doing, how they're going to win re-election. You can't change the fact that you have an 81-year-old president and a large section of the voting public view him as not capable of doing the job. I mean, he's 81 years old. You saw him over in Normandy last week. I mean, did he look like someone that you wanted to represent the United States? And on the other hand, Trump goes on and does these constant interviews, a figure, whether you agree with his policies or disagree with his policies, I know a lot of people here agree with him, Trump demonstrates strength. He'll sit here and answer all the questions. He'll sit down. He'll interview after interview. I've seen the man in person. When we're in Mar-a-Lago, the guy is a ball of energy. And I'll tell you one other thing, folks, you may not realize, Trump is funny. People like to laugh every now and then. And Trump makes you laugh. I mean, he is what I deem to be someone that the country needs right now. And I think these voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, I think they're going to see that. And if these economic trends continue, like Dr. Mark was talking about today, where people are not getting ahead on real wages, I think that's going to bode well for the president. Look at an example of what happened last week, too. His border policy. He's been saying for months, oh, we can't do anything about the border. We can't do anything. Then what do these geniuses do? These in the White House? Well, we're going to tighten immigration, allow 2,500 people a day to come across. Folks, it's as bad now as it's ever been. They're not fooling the American public. And this is another issue that is coming down in Trump's favor. When you're leading by 20 points on economics, 15 to 20 on the border, and those are two significant issues, you've got a good shot. And what are the Democrats going to do? They're going to call him a felon every chance they get. I got news for you. When people go to vote, and we got to make sure we get everybody out to the polls to do that, people aren't going to worry about what Donald Trump did happen in New York with a liberal jury, a fake prosecutor, fake charges that should never have been brought, anything worse than a misdemeanor at best. The American people are behind Trump in this piece. So a lot of things can happen, but think about what we have coming up here. June 27th, Trump-Biden debate. July, I think it's 11th, the sentencing date, and then 4 days after that, the convention. So a lot can happen, but right now, coming out of that trial, the polling numbers that I'm seeing, folks, bode very well for Donald Trump. All right, that's it for Saturday show. You can also catch us on Sunday, same bad time, same bad channel. Patriot TV, what a great list of hosts we've got. Thank you for viewing, thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting our advertisers. Onward and upward at Patriot.tv as we head into the summer. Thanks for viewing, thanks for listening. See you next week.